So why did his sister not go and join the others? She probably only just got up and not even begun to get dressed. And why was she crying? Was it all because he had not got up and had not let the chief clerk in because he was in danger of losing his job, and if that happened his boss would once more pursue their parents with the same demands as before? There was no need to worry about things like that yet. Gregor was still there and had not the slightest intention of abandoning his family. For the time being, he just lay there on the carpet, and no one who knew the condition he was in would have seriously expected him to let the chief clerk in. It was only a minor discourtesy, and a suitable excuse could easily be found for it later on. It was not something for which Gregor could be sacked on the spot, and it seemed to Gregor much more sensible to leave him now in peace instead of disturbing him with talking and crying. But the others didn't know what was happening. They were worried that would excuse their behavior. The chief clerk now raised his voice. "Mr. Samsa," he called to him, "what is wrong? You barricade yourself in your room. Give us no more than yes or no for an answer. You are causing serious and unnecessary concern to your parents, and you fail. And I mention this just by the way, you fail to carry out your business duties in a way that is quite unheard of. I'm speaking here on behalf of your parents and all of your employer, and really must request a clear and immediate explanation. I am astonished, quite astounded, I thought. I knew you as a common, sensible person, and now you suddenly seem to be showing off with peculiar whims. This morning your employer did suggest a possible reason for your failure to appear. It's true it had to do with money that was recently entrusted to you, but I came near giving him my word of honor that could not be the right explanation. But now I see your incomprehensible stubbornness, I no longer feel any wish whatsoever to intercede on your behalf, and nor is your position all that secure. I had originally intended to say all this to you in private, but since you caused me to waste my time here for no good reason, I don't see why your parents should not also learn of it. Your turnover has been very unsatisfactory of late. I grant you that it's not the time of year to do especially good business. We recognize that, but there simply is no time of year to do business at all, Mr. Sam, so we cannot allow there to be. But, sir, called Gregor, beside himself and forgetting all else in excitement, I'll open up immediately, just a moment. I'm slightly unwell, an attack of dizziness. I haven't been able to get up. I'm still in bed now. I'm quite fresh again, though. I'm just getting out of bed. Just a moment. Be patient. Not as easy as I thought. I'm quite all right now, though. It's shocking what can suddenly happen to a person. But I was quite all right last night. My parents know about it, perhaps better than me. I had a small symptom of it last night already. They must have noticed it. I don't know why I didn't let you know at work. But you always think you can get over an illness without staying at home. Please, don't make my parents suffer. There's no basis for any of the accusations you're making. Nobody's ever said a word to me about these things. Maybe you haven't read the latest contracts I sent in. I'll set off with the 8 o'clock train as well. These few hours of rest have given me strength. You don't need to wait, sir. I'll be in the office soon after you, and please be so good as to tell the boss and recommend me to him. And while Gregor gushed out these words, hardly knowing what he was saying, he made his way over to the chest of drawers. This was easily done, probably because of the practice he had already had in bed, where he now tried to get himself upright. He really did want to open the door, really did want to let them see him and to speak with the chief clerk. The others were being so insistent, and he was curious to learn what they would say when they caught sight of him. If they were shocked, then it would no longer be Gregor's responsibility, and he could rest. If, however, they took everything calmly, he could still have no reason to be upset, and if he hurried, really could be at the station for 8 o'clock. The first few times he tried to climb up on the smooth chest of drawers, he just slid down again. But he finally gave himself one last swing and stood there upright. The lower part of his body was in serious pain, but he could no longer give any attention to it. Now he let himself fall against the back of a nearby chair and held tightly to the edges of it with his little legs. By now he had also calmed down, and kept quiet so that he could listen to what the chief clerk was saying. "Did you understand a word of that?" the chief clerk asked his parents. "Surely he's not trying to make fools of us." "Oh, God," called his mother. "He could be seriously ill, and we're making him suffer." "Greet, greet," she then cried. "Mother," his sister called from the other side. They communicated across Gregor's room. "You'll have to go to the doctor straight away. Gregor is ill. Quick, get the doctor. Did you hear the way Gregor spoke just now? That was the voice of an animal," said the chief clerk, with a calmness that was in contrast with his mother's screams. "Anna, Anna," his father called in the kitchen through the entrance hall, clapping his hands. "Get a locksmith here now." and the two girls, their skirts swishing immediately, ran out through the hall, wrenching open the front door of the flat as they went. How had his sister managed to get dressed so quickly? There was no sound of the door banging shut again. They must have left it open. People often do it in homes when there is something awful that has happened. Gregor, in contrast, had become much calmer, so he couldn't understand his words anymore, although they seemed clear enough to him, clearer than before. Perhaps his ears had become used to the sound. They had realized, though, that there was something wrong with him, and they were ready to help. The first response to his situation had been confident and wise, and that made him feel better. He felt that he had been drawn back in among people, and from the doctor and the locksmith he expected great and surprising achievements, although he did not really distinguish one from the other. Whatever was said next would be crucial, so, in order to make his voice as clear as possible, he coughed a little, but taking care not to do this, perhaps too loudly, as might as well seem different from the way that a human coughs, and he was no longer sure he could judge this for himself. Meanwhile, it had become very quiet in the next room. Perhaps his parents were sat at the table whispering with the chief clerk, or perhaps they were all pressed against the door and listening. Gregor slowly pushed his way to the door with the chair. Once he let go of it and threw himself onto the door, holding himself upright, using adhesive on the tips of his legs. He rested there a little, while to recover from the effort involved, and set himself to the task of turning the key in the lock with his mouth. He seemed unfortunately to have no proper teeth. How was he, then, to grasp the key? But the lack of teeth was, of course, made up for with a very strong jaw. Using the jaw, he really was able to start the key turning, ignoring the fact that he must have been causing some kind of damage as a brown fluid came from his mouth, flowed over the key, and dripped onto the floor. "Listen," said the chief clerk in the next room. "He's turning the key." Gregor was greatly encouraged by this, but they all should have been calling out to him, his father and mother too. "Well done, Gregor," they should have cried. "Keep at it. Keep hold of the lock." And with the idea that they were all excitedly following his efforts, he bit on the key with all his strength, paying no attention to the pain he was causing himself. As the key turned round, he turned back around the lock with it, only holding himself upright with his mouth, and hung onto the key or pushed himself down again with the whole weight of his body as needed. This clear sound of the lock as it snapped back was Gregor's sign that he could break his concentration, and as he regained his breath, he said to himself, "So I didn't need the locksmith after all." Then he lay his head on the handle of the door to open it completely. Because he had to open the door in this way, it was already wide open before he could be seen. He had to first slowly turn himself around one of the double doors, and he had to carefully examine if he did not want to fall on his back before entering the room. He was still occupied with this difficult movement, unable to pay attention to anything else, when he heard the chief clerk exclaim aloud, "Oh!" which sounded like the soughing of the wind. Now he also saw him. He was the nearest to the door, his hand pressed against his open mouth and slowly retreating as if driven by a steady and invisible force. Gregor's mother, her hair still disheveled from bed, despite the chief clerk's being there, looked at his father. Then she unfolded her arms, took 2 steps forward towards Gregor, and sank down onto the floor into her skirts that spread themselves out around her as her head disappeared down onto her breast. His father looked hostile and clenched his fist as if wanting to knock Gregor back into his room. Then he looked uncertainly around the living room, covered his eyes with his hands, and wept so painfully that his powerful chest shook. So Gregor did not want to go into the room, but leant against the inside of the other door, which was already still lightly bolted in place. In this way, only half of his body could be seen, along with his head above it, which leant over to the side as he peered out at the others. Meanwhile, the day had become much lighter. Part of the endless gray-black buildings on the other side of the street, which was the hospital, could be seen quite clearly with the austere and regular line of windows piercing its facade. The rain was still falling, now throwing down large individual droplets which hit the ground one at a time. The washing up from breakfast lay on the table. There was so much of it because for Gregor's father breakfast was the most important meal of the day, and he would stretch it out for several hours as he sat reading a number of different newspapers. On the wall exactly opposite there was photographs of Gregor when he was a lieutenant in the army, his sword in hand, with a carefree smile on his face as he called forth respect for his uniform and bearing. The door to the entrance hall was open, and the front door of the flat was also open, as he could see onto the landing where the stairs began their way down below. "Now then," said Gregor, well aware that he was the only one to have kept calm, "I'll get dressed straight away now. Pack up my samples and set off. Will you please just leave me be? You can see," he said to the chief clerk, "that I'm not stubborn and I like to do my job. Being a commercial traveler is arduous, and without traveling I couldn't earn my living." "So where are you going, into the office?" Yes? Will you report everything accurately, then? It's quite possible for someone to be temporarily unable to work, but that's just the right time to remember what's been achieved in the past and consider that later on. Once the difficulty has been removed, he will certainly work with all the more diligence and concentration.